sufficiently. If the child is either not attended to sufficiently, consistently, reliably, or there's abuse that interrupts that process, that child might not learn how to self-regulate. So self-regulate meaning how to calm themselves. So if they're abused prior to that, the symptoms can be, like very very sort of attacking their core, right? Like they won't know how to calm themselves. They will certainly not grow up with the ability to trust other people. And they sometimes will manifest in like things like dissociative identity disorder, things like that, because that's the body's response to extreme trauma. It will literally develop like a whole other alter ego to support the system. Um, but yeah, so otherwise, you could, in lesser sort of trauma responses, what you might see is, kids with severe behavioral issues, being misdiagnosed as, say, ADHD, OCD, ODD, those kinds of things, when really it's a response to trauma.
Mm. So trauma is kind of it's so in the States, trauma is really starting to become a buzzword. You're starting to hear it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Different types of, I have trauma, you have
Mm-hmm.
trauma. Um, what is the difference? Like, is there a difference between specifically sexual trauma and kind of like the effects or the impacts of sexual trauma in men versus other types of trauma like abandonment
Oh, for sure, for
or
sure.
physical abuse? What do those look like?
Well, absolutely, right? I mean, it's high likelihood that it's going to affect your your trust, b, your possibly your sexual identity, right? Like again, like I wrote about in my book there, the male body, the female body, it's designed by God to respond to touch. So it does oftentimes, even during abuse, even when that touch is not wanted. Well, and of course offenders will hallmark on that, use it against the victim. Oh, look, you're a willing participant, that kind of thing. Leave them confused, try to convince them that they enjoyed it, whether or not they like their offender, or whether or not they were wanting to participate. This is why we have laws in place, because children are not old enough to consent. But yeah, so I mean, it could affect their sexual preferences too, right? In the sense that it could either make them feel that they're attracted to the gender that abused them, or absolutely opposed to it. So it could go either way.
Wow. Um, so Dr. Kelly, like what one thing that I love about you, like when after reading your book, you gave some amazing stories. One of the stories that stuck out to me was the young man who, in your book, you talk about he goes to this camp, he goes away to the sports
Mm-hmm.
camp and he winds
Mm-hmm.
up getting abused at the sports camp.
Mm-hmm.
And you really start talking about the nature of an offender, the nature of a predator, right? In
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
in that specific. So I hope you know. I really read your book. So
I know.
we start talking about the nature of a predator. I
Mm-hmm.
said this in our book. I said oftentimes parents we look out for the weird guy who's in the truck, who gives away candy, who's a little just too
Yeah.
nice, right? How do we as parents or people even just look, how do we identify predators? Is
Yeah.
there a way to
Yeah.
do that?
Well, I mean, obviously there's no sure way to do that, but I often tell people, if it seems too good to be true, it might be, right? Like,
Mm,
like, right? Like, I mean, I honestly think anytime you've got an adult or an older child trying to create alone time with a younger child, just pay attention, right? That could be a red flag. Yeah, I mean, so in adults, we would be looking at the adult that's not engaged in other adult relations, but of course we know that's not a standard, right? A lot of them, you have what we call cover relationships, right, to
mm,
hide behind. But that the adult that's not capable of being in adult, intimate relationships, or sometimes it is that odd one that can't relate to people. But oftentimes there is no difference. There's nothing that you can say would tell. Again, I would like make yourself familiar with the grooming techniques. like, the offenders will typically, like, you're right, it's not stranger danger. As you know, the men in your group were probably mostly abused by people that they knew and or cared for. So we've got situations where the offender is going to first groom himself, and by that he will get himself situated so that he's going to be in an environment where he will have access to children, whether that's volunteering to care for a child or volunteering at a school or a hospital or football field or whatever that looks like. Then he will groom the parents. Oftentimes, he'll befriend the parents so that the
Wow.
parent thinks that they're the
Wow.
parent
Wait,
thinks that they're
so you
awesome.
said he'll groom the parents too?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a process. He'll groom himself. He'll groom the parent, and he'll groom the child. So he grooms the parent to think that this guy just likes kids. Like, he's awesome. I can trust him. And one of the things that they'll do, which often leaves the kids confused, is, for example, he'll tickle the child in front of the adult. He'll roughhouse with the child in front of the adult. So it gets that child accustomed to being touched in front of the adult. And when the adult is saying, "Hey, this is okay," then the child deems that being touched by this person is okay. So it normalizes the touch, right?
Mm,
Then they typically work to a situation where they're going to get that child away from the parent, away from everybody else. Hey, I'm going to the Canucks game or whatever. I don't know who your teams are down there, the Chicago Bulls, whoever you watch, right?
right.
Like, I'm going to the game. Can I take your kid, right, or whatever? Like, they'll look for vulnerable kids, but as I wrote in my book, and as you know, I'm sure, like, any child can be susceptible. All children have needs, needs to attach, needs to relate to people in healthy ways. So they will first typically appeal as a healthy relationship. They could spend days, weeks, months, even years establishing those relationships, which is again one of the things that really confuses boys, because they think it's presented then as a seduction rather than a rape, whereas that was the offender's intent the whole time. So yeah, so they will spend
Wow.
considerable time and effort presenting themselves to be in that situation. I mean, I know from your book that there was a lot of instances of violent, like, abuse that is, maybe even more standard in different areas of the city, and but I would say, like, in a lot of Western culture, this is where it's happening too, right? Like,
Dr. Kelly, like you, I don't know if you know what you just said to a lot of us or a lot of survivors out here. Um, I had to pause for a minute. I'm not normally taken back, but I just I was reminded of some of my experiences as a survivor. I had this
mm-hmm,
relationship with a mentor that I looked
mm-hmm,
at as a big brother from literally, they
mm-hmm,
knew me since I was a little, like, 9, 10, 11
mm-hmm,
years old.
mm-hmm.
Never came on to me sexually, was always helpful, kind of was always there. If I needed something, they were always right there. But the minute that I turned 18 and came back from college, they were like, they were all over. Like, I'll never forget.
That relationship changed,
Like,
yeah.
it changed forever. I looked at this person as a big brother, a mentor, and out
Yeah.
of nowhere, it was like it turned like sexual, and I was like, "Whoa, wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute!" And I didn't realize that. But and
Mm-hmm. I
as
love
I'm
that.
listening to you say
Mm-hmm.
that, it
Mm-hmm.
hit me like, "Wait a minute!" Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, go ahead.
What I hear out of that, I don't want to cut you off, but what I hear out of that is his age of preference was, 18, right? Or he's, well, I guess I don't know the laws in the US, but in Canada you'd be deemed an adult by that point, so there would
Right,
be no criminal charges, right?
right.
It,
And that is the
especially
law
if
here.
you were an immature teenager. Yeah, especially if you were immature, right? Then if you looked like you're underage, that would be more thrilling to him, perhaps, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, he was a police officer, and
Ugh,
he was a
bleh.
I know,
Oh,
right? He was a police officer, and he waited
yeah,
until I was 18,
yeah.
until I was 18. But the thing is, he knew about my entire life up until that point.
Oh,
So it was just
yeah.
like, it was like, what? But I'm
Oh,
hearing
I
you,
hate that.
I'm hearing you, Kelly, and you're like, you're shedding light because I think um, you one thing that you talked about with male survivors is grooming, and I don't think
Mm-hmm,
a lot of us, like, we think of sexual trauma and we think of rape,
mm-hmm,
we think of
mm-hmm,
somebody
mm-hmm,
forcefully coming in,
mm-hmm,
taking,
mm-hmm,
taking something,
mm-hmm,
like. But can
mm-hmm,
you speak to what grooming
mm-hmm,
is, like? Because I think
mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's a word
yeah,
that many
yeah.
people are not familiar
Mm-hmm.
with.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry if my headphone dies. I
No, you're
dropped one
good.
of them when I
Okay.
grabbed it, I'll just pull them out if it does. Um, so yeah, like I said, grooming is like several stages for the offender. So first off, there's two types of offenders that we're aware of: situational and preferential. A situational offender will take any situation with any child or adult anytime. They don't necessarily have an age or gender of preference. Whereas an opportunistic or preferential child molester is going to have a specific age and gender of preference. So their entire honest, like, it is their obsession. Like if you and I were money obsessed or whatever, all we think about is making money. That's all these guys think about, is how to get victims, how to like set themselves up to be believed over a child, win the affection of the parents, or get children in vulnerable situations, get them alone, um, like confuse them. So yeah, so it, like I said, let's say, you know, a, an offender, let's just say he might have an age of preference of 10 or 11 years old, right? So he might start coaching the kid in junior league or whatever, and then he'll decide he's going to be a coach in like senior league or whatever age group that is. Sorry. But he might make promises like, "Hey, I see a lot of potential in you. You got a lot. I want to work with you because I think you can make it to the big leagues. We're going to work really hard." And then, for example, he's going to start, coaching you, grooming you, letting you play more than everybody else, like really developing you as an athlete, for example. And then, he's going to work you really hard so that you're dying. And then he's going to offer to massage you. And that massage might lead to sexual touch, right? And you know, he might even say something like, orgasms are good for adrenaline dump or whatever. Now you'll be able to sleep better, whatever. Like he'll justify it. So he's groomed you through developing the relationship. He's groomed himself through putting himself in that situation. He's groomed your family by saying, "Hey, your son has so much potential. Please let me have unfettered access to him. So he's going to make the big leagues." And he's filled your head for several months with the idea that you're going to make it to the big leagues. And now the ultimatum is that kind of, if you don't let him do this, there's not much chance of you getting to the big leagues, or whatever it is that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a coach. Obviously, that's just an example. But and then because you had that affection for him prior to the abuse, he's going to present it to you as if, "Ooh, look at what happened. It just went too far between us, like a consensual relationship." He's going to treat you, he's going to test you first, too. So, for example, he might let you have a beer, or he might let you smoke a joint, or he might let you have access to pornography. And then he's going to wait and see if you tell your parents. And if you don't tell your parents, it becomes your little secret. So that bonds you in the secrecy. And it also is something that he will, yeah, I know. So he'll use this against you so that after the abuse, like, he makes it, he just kind of builds on it as if it's a consensual relationship. He's going to treat you like you're more of a man. He's going to talk to you like you're a man. He's going to talk to you like you know what you're doing. Like, my example from camp, he's 15. He didn't know about masturbation. He'd never been doing that. But the offender presented him with these magazines and said, "I know you know what to do with these." And then, of course, had peepholes cut in his cabin so he could see what he was doing with them, right? And then, of course, opens the door at the opportune moment to catch him masturbating, and tells him, this is what guys do when they're alone. Like, "I'm surprised you don't know this kind of thing. Like, this is what dudes do. It's natural. It's normal," right? So he's going to leave him confused. And of course, if he brings him to orgasm, which is his goal, he's gonna use it as evidence against him. So by the time you get back to your parents' house or whatever, you're so freaking confused. You don't know whether you willingly participated or not. And not only that, you've done a whole but he's going to remind you of all those things that you did that you're not allowed to do, like drive a truck or play video games or drink alcohol or smoke weed or look at pornography. And then he's going to say, "Make sure you don't tell because we're both going to get in trouble," right? So I mean, so and he will also be grooming himself at the end to say, you know, what I did. Robert needs to know about sex anyways. He might as well learn it from me, a nice guy, rather than this violent guy down the street who's not going to be near as nice to him as I was, right? Like, yeah, it's crazy. And then if it was a woman, I mean, of course you're even going to be more confused because you might even tell your buddies, and your buddy's going to go, "Score, lucky you, she's hot," right? Meanwhile, you're 12 and your teacher's 42, and it's disgusting.
Kelly,
So,
my text messages are going off right now. And what I mean by that, somebody just so one person just said, "Bro, this is crazy. I relate to this. What she's saying is so much. It's so true. It's scary." Like
hmm
Kelly,
hmm
you are legit like talking about all of our
I know,
experience.
I know.
It's
Yeah,
all like
yeah. Hey, I learned from you. I learned from reading your book too. There was something that I really appreciated. Now I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but there was something that I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know that.
Like, I think for, and especially like in urban communities, sex is never talked about, right? Sex is never talked about for, in a healthy manner. And we're always kind of
hmm
exposed to it, and
hmm
in different ways. And I think what you just did, you made us realize that number one, that like these things don't just happen by
Yeah,
happenstance.
yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah, yeah,
intentional.
yeah.
They're
Yeah, yeah.
calculated.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very, very, very. 94% of abuse is perpetrated by someone the victim knows and loves, right? That video you sent me at 6 o'clock in the morning the other day, right? Like, I mean, his mom goes to jail and his mom's best friend takes him in. That's not a coincidence, right? She was waiting for her opportunity, right?
Kelly, like
Yeah,
what you're saying is so powerful, but it's so scary at the same time that you
I
have this
know, I
down to a
know,
science.
I know,
You have it down to a science. That's why you
I
are who
know.
you are. But man, as I'm listening to you, uh, I'm I'm perplexed because I'm as a survivor. I'm looking at myself
Mm-hmm,
and even though I'm doing this work, I'm empowering men, helping
mm-hmm,
men.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
As I'm listening to you, I'm like, whoa,
mm-hmm,
she is like this is real. So some
mm-hmm.
research says that most men who experience any form of sexual trauma, it will take them almost 25 years to even admit that this
Mm-hmm,
is what
mm-hmm.
happened. You just mentioned,
Right,
and
for sure.
especially in
Yeah.
urban communities as well, especially for boys, it is kind of an initiation into manhood to be
Yeah.
exposed to sex
hmm
early
Yeah.
on.
hmm
We There's one guy in our book. His name is Jay Wallace, and actually his story. We shared his story on Facebook the other day, and it went viral because
Cool.
his story was specifically about a woman who he met in church who adopted him as his godson,
Yeah.
and
Gross. Yeah.
winded up basically from the age I think of like 13 to almost 18 years old,
Yeah.
um, kind of just sexually groomed him and
Yep.
made him kind of her own kind of sex like slave, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like would pick him up from school early, would have sex
hmm
with him
Yes.
everywhere,
Yes.
anywhere,
I think I
hotels,
watched that. I watched that. Yeah.
and
Um. eh,
go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead. No.
No,
No.
go
You.
ahead. So
Well, you
he's
saw me looking because I was gonna. I was looking for this book cover. Where can I just grab it? Give me two
Yeah,
seconds here.
grab
I'll
it.
see you.
Yes.
Um. I've talked to you about this book before, but if you can stomach reading it, it's Predators, Pedophiles, Rapists, and Other Sex Offenders by Dr. Anna Salter. And she interviewed a lot of the uh, psychopathic sex offenders. And one of the quotes that uh, no, this is not in my book, but it's going to be in the workbook that I'm working on. She talks about how the church is a great place for pedophiles to hide, right? Because all church people are supposed to be nice and we're supposed to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. So they're easy to fool.
Kelly, don't get on here and do that to me tonight.
I know, I'm
Don't
sorry. I'm
no
sorry,
don't.
but it's so true. I'm like, it blows my mind. Like, Robert, like, we need to blow the lid off this because pedophiles are hiding in churches, right? Like, if you look at my research, I think 7 out of 13, if not more, were abused by someone in the church. Like, dad was a pastor, and it was like either dad or dad's like deacon or whatever, right? Like, brutal.
Did you say 7 out of 13?
Oh yeah, at least something like that. Yeah, for sure. It was a lot. I mean, look at the Catholic Church, the pedophile ring that they. Have you watched that movie Spotlight?
No, I haven't. Oh,
There's
geez.
a movie called Spotlight, and it's basically how I think it was Chicago, how the Chicago. I think it was, I don't quote me on that, sorry, but they all of a sudden they heard these reports of of priests that were sexually offending in the church. And so they went to the library archives to look up where these guys had been transferred to, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, look at all the other priests that have been transferred and are on the same status." So they started this huge investigation, and I think they said somewhere around 2,400 they figured had been involved in this massive pedophile ring.
Wow. So you said 7 out of 13. So Kelly, one of the things that I talk about my, I actually I don't talk about my story, but I do a little bit, depending upon where I'm at, is also being sexually passed around, right? Like from
Yeah,
pastors.
very
Like
common.
as
Yeah,
a young boy, I
yeah.
was
Oh, it
invited to
breaks my heart.
sing or play at a church, and not
Yeah,
knowing that I was invited because the pastor that was the first abuser was
yeah,
friends
absolutely.
with this abuser, and they
They
already had a
work
conversation.
together. They work together. They
How
are
can this happen?
organized.
How can this
They are
happen though?
organized. Well, I mean, even years ago, you probably heard of the organization NAMBLA, North American Man Boy Love Association. I mean, that was years ago before the internet was even popular, right? Like, these guys are organized. Look at
And
the Jeffrey Epstein case, right? Like, that was right under everybody's nose for years. And then it's like the guy's got an entire island developed to pedophilic encounters. And it's like this secret, right, society. But I mean, how do they find each other? I don't know if they got a nod or whatever. Or I honestly think that, I honestly think it'd be just like Christians talking to each other saying, "Oh, you're a believer, cool, I'm a believer too," and you wind up talking. But you know yeah, they're very organized and they will share. And it's very common, once a boy's been abused, that he will be abused by multiple people. This is what blows my mind so much about male sexual abuse, and how quiet it is, because I don't believe that's the same for female victims. Like, I don't think they're passed around the same way male victims are. I don't know for sure, but like, according to pedophiles themselves, this is in my book if anybody else is interested. There was a research study where, again, I think it was on Craigslist. I don't know how they got volunteers, but they did. And they agreed to like give them immunity from prosecution. And they said, "We just want to know about your offending patterns." And they each admitted to about 150 victims each over their lifetime. So they are prolific. They will share. I mean, yeah, it's terrible.
like Like my text messages are blowing up right now, Kelly, because you know why? Because I think, and I'm trying not to cry here, because
I'm
it's so
sorry.
no, it's okay, it's healing, because I think for so many men, and especially I'll speak African American, Latino men, I think this happens in silos and it
I
happens
know.
in
I know.
silence,
Yeah,
and so
I
you
know.
grow up thinking that you're the only
Yeah,
one. And then for
I
you
know.
to just throw out a statistic like 7 out of 13, what was it? 7 out of 13
I think
men.
so. I mean, I'd have to look, but I'm
Well,
just
some,
off the
but
top of my
even
head.
the
Yeah,
fact it's
like, it's
it's that
ridiculous.
high.
Oh,
7 out of 13 people are in church. Now I'm going to switch the corner for some of you guys who are watching. The reason why I'm saying this, because because in the states, between the 80s, the 90s, the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was this generation of in the black community, because of a lot of social stuff, where the father was not a part of the picture, right?
I
And there
hear that.
was
Yeah,
that, and it was really big in the states. And many of us and our parents were the kind of the generations that were impacted
yeah,
by this kind of big
absolutely.
fatherlessness
Yeah,
gap.
yeah, yeah.
But what happened was a lot of the women or the mothers went to church. They were avid churchgoers, and
Mm-hmm,
especially
mm-hmm,
in the black
mm-hmm,
community,
mm-hmm.
the church
Yeah.
was the hub, the epicenter,
Mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm,
every it wasn't it was the community center, it was the
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
daycare,
mm-hmm. I know. Yeah, for
it
sure.
was
Yeah,
the social
yeah.
services space, right?
Right?
It was
What a
the place
great
to
place
go.
for an offender to go to find victims. There's a plethora of them.
Like, but do, and I'm thinking about that. Like, we were the ones, and this is what I was getting to, is that these men, or my generation and before, were the ones who went to church with their mother, with their grandmother. You'll hear the narrative. I had a
Mm-hmm.
praying
Oh
grandmother.
yeah,
I
yeah.
had a praying
Oh,
mother.
for sure. Yeah.
But It's like
Several of my participants too, yeah.
you are ruthless, Kelly. Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
So that no, you're okay. Don't be
No,
sorry. I love it. Like
no.
they
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
I forget
Kelly.
what I was gonna say. No, I
Go
forget what I
ahead.
was gonna say. I have terrible memory
But
issues. Can't
it's
talk.
like seven, but to hear like we were the fruit of
Yeah.
praying and highly spiritual
Hmm. Hmm.
women who were in
Hmm.
church,
Hmm. Hmm.
but broken men who like what
But
happened?
and I honestly, Robert, I honestly think that because of the underreporting and because of the confusion, I think female offenders are grossly underreported. I could be wrong, but I don't think so, right? Because I think,
Mm.
I mean, you talk to your guys, how many of your guys were abused by, mom's best friend or an aunt or a cousin or babysitter or whatever, but they didn't necessarily recognize it as abuse because she was a girl, right? But yeah, offenders will go to those environments and they'll say, "Oh, Miss Marshall, your son, yeah, your mom's saying, oh yeah, Robert would really like to play hockey, but we don't have the money, and I work that night anyways, so even if we did have the money, I couldn't take him." Oh, well, you know what? Let me look through my closet and see if I happen to have an old set of hockey gear that might fit Robert. And then he goes out and buys it, finds it, comes back and says, "You know what, Miss Marshall? I could take your son to hockey. I'd be delighted to. I always wanted kids of my own. Let me help you there, right?" And for 3 4 months, everything will be great, and you're having the time of your life, and honestly, because he's allowing you this privilege that you've never had before, like financially, socially, all this thing, you might even make the decision to tolerate the abuse because the life that he's affording you is better. It just comes at a cost, right? Like, it's brutal.
And that reminds me of one of the stories of the guys. Um, uh, One of the stories of the guys. He talks about how his father in our book Echoes. He talks about how his stepfather was his abuser, and his stepfather,
Mm-hmm.
from like age 5 or 6, would take him in the basement and physically rape him, and
Oh no.
would whisper in his ears,
Yeah.
like, "You're
Yeah.
gonna like boys. I'm gonna make you gay. Like you're gonna
Jeez.
be gay." And it happened from
Mm.
like 5 to like 13 years of age,
Jeez.
and
I
he would go
rebuke
through
that.
this. He would go through it consistently, and
Yeah.
he talked about he would experience that, and he wound up not having sex until he got to college because he was afraid that his teammates. He was an
Yeah.
athlete. His teammates thought he was
Yeah.
gay because he was an attractive guy,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
to offset that, what he did was instead of sleeping with men, he went and slept with a whole bunch of
Yeah.
women,
For sure.
to
Yeah.
kind of to
Yeah.
kind of
Absolutely. Proving to himself and to everybody else that he's not gay. He'll be hypersexualized for sure. And I mean, I'm not going to forget to do this, but Robert, I just want to say all of you guys are freaking true heroes. Being so courageous to tell your stories the way you are, I will do everything and everything to anything and everything to support you guys. Like, you guys are the ones that are going to make a difference. Like, sure, I have like my areas of expertise too, but I'm clearly not a male survivor. You guys breaking the stigma, breaking the silence, like especially being open about any struggles that you've had with your sexuality, that has never been talked about openly. So, I mean, God bless you all. You're all so brave. And then, I mean, I love the fact that you don't just necessarily say that this is the way I'm going to be, right? You're like, no, I'm going to have a wife and I'm going to have children and I'm going to whatever get healing from the Lord, and I'm not just gonna believe the lies that my offender told me, or the way my body responded, because it
so.
was,
Mm,
yeah.
One of the things I talk about with men, so male survivors, is oftentimes what happens is a male survivor, whether their offender is a female or male, oftentimes what happens is their power to choose who they desire to be, is ripped away from them. So if they were in,
Yeah.
oftentimes down, their body is exposed prematurely,
Absolutely.
oftentimes
Yeah.
to sex
Yeah.
and sexuality,
Hmm.
and they
Yeah.
have no point of reference. They have no
Yeah.
conversation.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, I'm
No, go
sorry. I
ahead.
should be.
Go. I'm
But
here for you.
we call, like, there's something called the law of first mention, right? So the first time you learn about something, the first time you learn about any subject, whether it's from your parents or at school, this is why we have to educate our children ourselves before they go to school, right? So let's say the first time, I don't want to go there, but